Montana Territory, 1876. The autumn wind carried the scent of pine and the metallic hint of coming snow as Violet Winters watched the stranger stumble toward her cabin, his horse limping badly beside him. She stood frozen on her porch, bucket in hand, as man and beast emerged from the dusky tree line, both wounded, both desperate. The man's hat hung low over his face, but when he looked up, their eyes met across the yard. Even at this distance, she could see the pain etched across his handsome features. "Please," he called, his voice breaking with exhaustion. "My horse, she's hurt bad." In that moment, Violet knew her quiet life was about to change forever. Beau Vickers had been riding for 3 days straight, pushing himself and his prized Palomino mare, Sunny, beyond endurance. The bullet wound in his side had mostly stopped bleeding, but Sunny's leg injury was worsening with each painful step. When he spotted the small cabin nestled against the foothills, smoke curling from its chimney, he nearly wept with relief. The young woman who stood watching him approach wore a simple blue calico dress, her chestnut hair caught in a loose braid that fell over one shoulder. She didn't run inside or grab a rifle, both reactions he'd grown accustomed to, but instead set down her bucket and walked toward him, eyes assessing both his injuries and his intentions. "Your horse needs immediate attention," she said, her voice steady despite the wariness in her eyes. She glanced at the blood staining his shirt. "And it appears you do as well." "Horse first," Beau insisted, wincing as he shifted in the saddle. "I'll manage." The woman nodded once, decisively. "I'm Violet Winters. There's a small barn behind the cabin. Can you make it that far?" "Beau Vickers." "And yes, ma'am, we can make it." He gently urged Sunny forward, following as Violet led them around to a tidy barn that smelled of fresh hay and leather. Inside, Violet quickly cleared a stall and gestured for him to bring Sunny in. The mare was trembling now, her golden coat dark with sweat, the gash on her front leg crusted with dirt and blood. "How did this happen?" Violet asked, kneeling to examine the wound as Beau slid carefully from the saddle. "Creek bed collapsed. Sharp rocks. Been riding hard for." He swayed suddenly, catching himself against the stall door. Violet looked up sharply. "Mr. Vickers?" "Beau." The world tilted sideways as Beau felt his knees buckle. The last thing he saw was Violet's concerned face moving toward him, her eyes the color of spring violets, before darkness claimed him. When consciousness returned, Beau found himself on a narrow bed, his shirt removed and a clean bandage wrapped around his midsection. The cabin was warm, lit by oil lamps and a crackling fire. He tried to sit up, but fell back with a groan. "Don't," came Violet's voice from across the room. "You'll tear the stitches." She approached with a steaming cup, her face composed but her eyes revealing concern. "You've lost blood. Bullet wound, if I'm not mistaken. Care to explain why a man arrives at my door shot and riding a wounded horse?" Beau accepted the cup, broth, rich and savory, and took a careful sip before answering. "Sunny, is she? Your mare is resting. I cleaned and bandaged her leg. It's a nasty cut, but with proper care, she should heal completely." Violet pulled a chair close to the bed. "Now, about that bullet." Beau hesitated. The truth could put her in danger, but lying felt wrong to a woman who had shown him such kindness. "I was a courier," he said finally, "carrying payroll for the Northern Pacific Railroad. 3 men ambushed me about 40 miles east of here. I got away, but not before taking a bullet." "And the money?" Violet asked, her expression carefully neutral. Beau's eyes met hers. "Hidden. Safe. Those men. They'll be looking for you." It wasn't a question, but Beau nodded anyway. "Yes, though they think they wounded me worse than they did. Probably waiting for me to die somewhere in the woods." Violet stood abruptly and walked to the window, peering out into the darkness. "Well, you can't travel until you're stronger. And your horse won't be ready for at least 2 weeks." She turned back to face him. "I suppose you'll be staying, Mr. Vickers." There was something in her tone, resignation mixed with another emotion he couldn't quite identify, that made Beau wonder what stories lay behind those violet eyes. What circumstances had left this beautiful young woman alone in a cabin on the edge of wilderness? And why didn't she seem more troubled by harboring a stranger who had brought danger to her door? "I won't put you at risk," he promised. "As soon as I can ride, I'll go." The ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Until then, rest. We'll talk more in the morning." As Violet closed the door to the small adjoining room where she slept, Beau stared at the rough-hewn ceiling, listening to the wind picking up outside. For the first time in days, despite the pain and danger, he felt something like peace. In the barn, Sunny nickered softly as the door creaked open. Violet entered with a lantern and a bundle of fresh bandages. The mare's intelligent eyes followed her movements as she checked the wound, cleaned it again, and applied a poultice of herbs. "He's worried about you, girl," Violet murmured, stroking the horse's neck. "He seems like a good man." She hesitated, then added more quietly, "But I've been wrong before." The horse blew softly through its nostrils, as if in understanding. 2 weeks, Violet said, more to herself than to the horse. 2 weeks, and then you'll both be gone. She didn't examine too closely why that thought left her feeling hollow inside. Morning brought weak sunshine and the smell of coffee. Beau awoke to find Violet at the stove, her hair loose around her shoulders, catching the light like burnished copper. She wore a simpler dress today, the kind meant for work, but somehow it only emphasized the graceful curve of her back, the slender strength of her arms. "You're awake," she said without turning. "Good. Breakfast is nearly ready." Beau managed to sit up, gritting his teeth against the pain. "Thank you for tending to me." And to Sunny. Now Violet did turn, a plate in each hand. "You can thank me by telling me the truth." She placed the food on the small table and helped Beau to a chair. His legs were steadier than he'd expected, though the room swam briefly when he stood. "The truth?" he asked, once they were seated. "About the men who shot you." Violet's direct gaze pinned him. 3 men have been asking about strangers at settlements east of here. They're saying they're looking for a horse thief who stole a valuable palomino. A thief who might be wounded. Beau's hand tightened on his fork. "You've been to town?" She shook her head. "Trapper came by yesterday while you were unconscious. Brings me supplies sometimes, shares news." Her expression softened slightly. "I told him I hadn't seen anyone." Relief washed through him. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I need to know what I'm risking by hiding you." Her voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. "The full truth, Mr. Vickers." Beau studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I was carrying $15,000 in cash for railroad workers' wages. The 3 men who attacked me, they've been hitting payroll deliveries for months. This time, they followed me from Helena. And the money? Hidden in a hollow tree about 5 miles from where they ambushed me. They never saw where I put it." Violet took a sip of coffee, considering. "So these are dangerous men, likely killers, searching for you and $15,000. "Yes." Beau met her eyes squarely. "Which is why I should leave as soon as possible. With a bullet wound and a lame horse." Violet raised one eyebrow. "You wouldn't make it 10 miles. The truth of her words stung, but Beau couldn't argue. He was trapped here, and potentially bringing danger to this woman's door with each passing hour. "Why are you helping me?" he asked suddenly. "You have every reason to turn me away." Something flickered across Violet's face, an old pain, quickly masked. "Let's just say I understand what it means to need shelter when the world turns against you." She stood, gathering their plates. "Now, I need to check on your horse. Rest today. Tomorrow we'll see if you can help with small chores." As she stepped outside, Beau was left wondering what shadows lurked in Violet Winter's past. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had rebuilt herself after being broken, and that recognition stirred something in his chest that had nothing to do with his wound. Over the next 3 days, a routine emerged. Mornings, Violet would check his bandages and then tend to Sunny, applying fresh poultices and walking the mare gently around the small corral. Afternoons, as Beau's strength gradually returned, he would help with simple tasks, chopping vegetables, mending harnesses, repairing a loose shutter. They talked, carefully at first, then with growing ease. Beau told her about growing up on a small ranch in Wyoming, losing his parents to typhoid when he was 17, making his way as a cowhand, and eventually finding steady work with the railroad. Violet shared less, speaking mostly of her knowledge of horses and healing herbs, learned from a Crow woman who had once befriended her. Of how she came to be living alone in this cabin, she said almost nothing. On the 4th evening, as they sat before the fire, Beau finally asked the question that had been troubling him. "Violet, who taught you to treat bullet wounds?" Her hand stilled on the shirt she was mending. His shirt, the bloodstains mostly washed away. For a long moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. "My husband," she said finally, so softly he almost didn't hear. He was a doctor. Beau waited, sensing there was more, giving her the space to continue or retreat. She repeated, her eyes on the dancing flames. He died 2 years ago, along with our son. The pain in her voice was raw, a wound still fresh despite the passage of time. I'm sorry, Beau said gently. Violet nodded, acknowledging his sympathy without looking up. There was an outbreak of diphtheria. Thomas, my husband, he treated everyone, worked without rest. By the time he fell ill himself, he was too weak to fight it. Her voice grew even quieter. Our boy followed 3 days later. He was 4. The weight of her loss filled the small cabin. Beau wanted to reach for her hand, but sensed she needed the distance. This was his family's hunting cabin, she continued after a moment. I couldn't stay in town after. Too many memories. Too many pitying looks and marriage proposals from men who thought I needed saving. A flash of anger crossed her face, as if I were just a possession left behind, to be claimed by whoever spoke first. So you came here? Yes. Most people think I've gone back east. Only a few know where I am, and they respect my privacy. She finally looked up at him. Until you arrived. Something passed between them in that moment. A recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. 2 people who had lost their moorings in the world and were still finding their way back. Thank you for telling me, Beau said. Violet held his gaze for another heartbeat, then returned to her sewing. Your mare is improving nicely. The swelling is almost gone. The subject was closed, but something had shifted between them. A door had opened, just a crack. That night, Beau dreamed of 3 riders approaching through swirling snow, their faces hidden, guns drawn. He woke with a start, heart pounding, to find the cabin dark and silent except for the dying embers in the fireplace. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the first few flakes of what promised to be an early snowfall. Violet appeared in her doorway, a shawl wrapped around her nightgown. Are you all right? Just a dream, he assured her, though unease still crawled along his spine. Sorry to wake you. She crossed to the window, peering out into the darkness. Snow's coming. Earlier than usual. How bad will it get? Hard to say, but if it's heavy, the pass to town could close until spring thaw. She turned back to him, her expression thoughtful. Your wound is healing well, but your horse still needs time. If the snow comes in earnest. She didn't need to finish. They both understood the implications. If the weather turned, Beau might be stranded here for months rather than weeks. I should leave before the snow makes it impossible, he said, though the thought of riding out, of leaving her cabin and her company, left an unexpected hollowness in his chest. And lead those men right to you when you can barely stay in the saddle? With a horse that might go lame again under strain? Violet shook her head. That would be foolish. More foolish than trapping yourself all winter with a stranger who's brought danger to your door. In the dim light, he saw her smile, small but genuine, the first he'd seen reach her eyes. I'm beginning to think you're not such a stranger anymore, Beau Vickers. The way she said his name sent a warmth through him that had nothing to do with his healing wound. Before he could respond, she returned to her room, leaving him to wonder at the complexities of this remarkable woman who had saved him in more ways than one. By morning, 3 inches of snow blanketed the ground, with more falling steadily. Beau stood on the porch, watching Violet make her way back from the barn, snowflakes catching in her hair and on her eyelashes. She moved with natural grace, her cheeks flushed from cold and exertion. Sonny's doing well, she reported as she stamped snow from her boots. No heat in the leg. Another week of rest should see her sound. And the weather? Violet glanced at the heavy sky. This is just the beginning, I think. There's a feeling in the air. She looked at him closely. Are you strong enough to help me bring in more firewood? We should prepare for the worst. Together, they worked through the morning, stacking split logs on the porch and bringing in enough to keep the fire fed for several days. Beau found his strength returning, though his side still ached if he twisted too quickly. By noon, the snow was falling so thickly they could barely see the barn from the cabin door. I think our decision has been made for us, Violet said as they sat down to a lunch of venison stew. You won't be going anywhere for a while. Beau nodded, surprised at the relief he felt. I'll earn my keep. I'm handy with repairs, and I can hunt once I'm stronger. And if your pursuers track you here? The question was practical, not accusatory. They won't find the money without me, Beau said with certainty. And in this weather, They'll assume I've either died or made it to the next settlement. No one would expect me to find shelter so far from the main trail. Violet seemed satisfied with this answer. Still, we should be cautious. No unnecessary trips to town. No fires outside that might draw attention. Agreed. Beau hesitated, then added, I won't endanger you, Violet. You have my word on that. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. I believe you. Those simple words, and the trust they implied, meant more to him than she could know. As the days passed and snow continued to fall, the world beyond the cabin faded into white silence. Beau's wound healed steadily under Violet's care, and each day he took on more responsibilities, clearing snow from the path to the barn, caring for Sunny, repairing tools and furniture that had long needed attention. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, talking or sometimes just enjoying comfortable silence. Beau discovered that Violet had a small collection of books, well-worn favorites that she sometimes read aloud. Her voice, soft and expressive, gave new life to stories he'd heard as a child or introduced him to ones he'd never known. Gradually, she revealed more pieces of her past. How she'd met her husband when she was just 18, newly arrived in Montana with her uncle, who had since returned east. How Thomas had been 15 years her senior but kind and respectful, teaching her about medicine and treating her as a partner rather than a possession. How their son, William, had his father's serious nature but her love of animals and wild places. In turn, Beau shared his own dreams, the small ranch he hoped to buy someday, the life he imagined building there. He told her about the loneliness of the trail, of always moving on before connections could deepen, of how, despite his youth, he sometimes felt as if he'd already lived several lifetimes, each one ending when circumstances forced him to move on. And yet you keep going, Violet observed one evening as they sat side by side, watching the fire. You don't give up. Beau considered this. What's the alternative? To stop living? That seems a poor way to honor the time we're given. Violet's expression grew distant. After Thomas and William died, that's exactly what I did. I stopped living. Coming here wasn't just about escaping pitying looks. It was about hiding from life itself. And now? Beau asked quietly. She turned to look at him, something vulnerable in her gaze. Now I'm not so sure that's what I want anymore. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Before either could speak again, a sound broke the silence, a distant but unmistakable crack that echoed across the snow-covered landscape. A gunshot. Violet froze, her eyes widening. Hunters, perhaps. Beau was already on his feet, moving to extinguish the lamp. Perhaps, but we can't take that chance. They waited in darkness, listening. Minutes passed with no further sounds except the wind and the crackle of the fire. Finally, Beau eased toward the window, peering cautiously through a gap in the curtains. Nothing, he reported. But it was close, within a mile or two. Could be the trapper, Violet suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. He sometimes hunts this area. Maybe. Beau didn't believe it any more than she did. We should take precautions. Where do you keep your rifle? By silent agreement, they took turns keeping watch through the night. The dawn brought no further disturbances, but the tension remained, an invisible presence in the cabin that had so recently felt like a sanctuary. After checking on Sunny, the mare was now moving with barely a hint of lameness. Beau made a decision. I need to retrieve the money and deliver it. It's the only way to end this. Violet, who had been kneading bread dough, stopped abruptly. In this weather? That's suicide, Beau. The snow is 2 feet deep in places. The longer I wait, the more danger I bring to your door. He crossed to her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. I can't let anything happen to you because of me. She looked up at him, concern written plainly across her features. And I can't let you ride to your death in a blizzard. Their faces were close now, close enough that Beau could see the small flecks of gold in her violet eyes, could feel the warmth of her breath. For a heartbeat, he thought he might lean down, close the distance between them. A pounding at the door shattered the moment. They sprang apart, Beau reaching for the rifle while Violet moved quickly to the side of the window, peering out cautiously. It's Jacob, the trapper, she whispered, relief evident in her voice. When she opened the door, snow swirled in along with a heavily bundled figure. The trapper, Jacob Miller, was a man of about 50 with a weathered face nearly hidden behind a frost-covered beard. He stamped his feet, and nodded at Beau without surprise. Miss Winters. Sir. Glad to see you're both all right. What brings you out in this weather, Jacob? Violet asked, pouring him a cup of hot coffee. The trapper accepted it gratefully, warming his hands around the cup before answering. Thought you should know, 3 men arrived in town 3 days ago. Been asking questions about strangers, especially any with a Palomino horse. Beau and Violet exchanged a look. They're staying at the saloon, Jacob continued. Mean-looking bunch. One's got a bandaged arm. Looks like he took a bullet recently. I winged one of them during the ambush, Beau said grimly. They're closer than I thought. Jacob nodded. Figured they might be trouble for you, especially when they started offering money for information. That's why I came to warn you. He glanced between them. Also heard them talking about a payroll shipment, $15,000 that never made it to the railroad camp. You've ridden a long way through dangerous conditions to bring this news, Beau said. I'm grateful. The trapper shrugged. Miss Winters has been good to me. Patched me up more than once when I've had accidents on the trapline. We look after our own out here. He finished his coffee and stood. I should get back before dark. They've been drinking heavily at night, but they ride out during daylight hours, searching. How far have they gone from town? Beau asked. Not this far yet. Been focusing on the main trails. But eventually, they'll widen their search. Jacob buttoned his heavy coat. You should know, there's also a railroad agent in town. Came looking for the missing payroll. Seems like an honest sort, asking at the telegraph office about any news of their courier. This was unexpected news. The railroad must have realized something had happened when Beau failed to arrive at the workers' camp with the money. Thank you, Jacob, Violet said, pressing a small package of dried herbs into his hands. For your wife's headaches. The trapper tucked them carefully into his pocket. Much obliged. I'll try to get word if those men start heading this way. With a nod to them both, he departed back into the swirling snow. When the door closed behind him, Violet turned to Beau. This changes things. Yes. His mind was already racing through possibilities. If the railroad agent is legitimate, I could get a message to him. Once he knows I'm alive and the money is safe. But how? Jacob won't be back for at least a week, and it's too dangerous for you to go into town. Beau paced the small room. I could retrieve the money first. Bring it here. Then we could figure out how to contact the agent. In this weather? Violet gestured toward the window, where snow continued to fall steadily. And with those men searching? It's too risky. Staying here puts you at risk, Beau countered. If they find this cabin, they won't, Violet insisted. Not for a while at least. The snow will keep getting deeper, and this place is well hidden from the main trails. Beau looked at her, seeing the determination in her stance. You're not afraid? A flicker of a smile crossed her face. Oh, I'm terrified. But I'm more afraid of you riding out into a blizzard and never coming back. The simple honesty of her admission touched something deep inside him. For 2 years, Violet had lived in isolation, protecting herself from further pain by avoiding connections. Now she was risking her safety for him. All right, he conceded. We wait for better weather. But at the first clear day, I'm going for that money. Violet nodded, relief visible in the slight relaxing of her shoulders. Fair enough. Now help me finish this bread. As they worked side by side in the warm kitchen, Beau found himself studying her profile, the determined set of her jaw, the graceful curve of her neck, the way a strand of chestnut hair had escaped her braid to curl against her cheek. In the short time he'd known her, Violet Winters had become more important to him than he'd thought possible. And that realization brought both joy and fear. Because soon, weather permitting, he would have to leave this cabin and face whatever waited beyond its sheltering walls. The thought of returning to his solitary life on the trail suddenly seemed bleaker than he remembered. That night, as they sat before the fire, a comfortable silence between them, Beau found himself speaking words he hadn't planned. Come with me. Violet looked up from her mending, surprise evident in her expression. What? When this is over, when the money is returned and those men are dealt with, come with me. Beau leaned forward, suddenly intent. I have savings. Enough to buy a small spread in peaceful country. We could start fresh. The firelight played across her features as she considered his words. Beau, we've known each other less than a month. And in that time, I've come to care for you more than anyone I've known in years. He reached for her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she allowed him to take it. I'm not Thomas. I know that. I would never try to replace what you lost. but I think we could build something good together. Violet's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I care for you too, more than I expected to ever care for anyone again. But I'm afraid. Of what? Of losing someone else I love. The admission seemed to surprise her as much as it did him. She pulled her hand away gently. I need time, Beau. This is all happening so fast. He nodded, understanding but unable to completely hide his disappointment. Of course, I shouldn't have rushed. It's not that. Violet's voice was soft. It's just that I've spent 2 years hiding from life, as you said. Learning to open my heart again. It's not easy. I understand. And he did. Hadn't he been doing much the same, in his own way? Moving constantly, never staying long enough to form attachments that might later bring pain. Take all the time you need. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the storm having finally passed. The landscape glittered under a blanket of pristine white, beautiful but treacherous. Beau stood on the porch, assessing the conditions, when Violet joined him. You're thinking of going for the money today, she said. It wasn't a question. The snow stopped. It's the best chance I'll have. She nodded, resignation in her posture. I know. I've packed provisions for you. She hesitated, then added. And I've decided to go with you. Beau turned to her in surprise. That's too dangerous. More dangerous than staying here alone if those men find the cabin while you're gone. Violet raised an eyebrow. Besides, Sunny is sound now, but a long ride through deep snow could aggravate her leg. I should be there to tend her if needed. Her practical reasoning made sense, but Beau suspected there was more behind her decision. Are you sure? No, she admitted with a small smile. But I'm going anyway. They prepared quickly, Beau checking and loading weapons while Violet gathered medical supplies and extra clothing. By mid-morning, they were ready to depart, Violet riding her sturdy bay gelding while Beau led Sunny carefully through the deep snow. The journey was slow and difficult, the horses sometimes sinking to their chests in drifts. They spoke little, conserving energy and staying alert for any sign of other travelers. By late afternoon, they had covered perhaps 10 miles, reaching the vicinity of the ambush site. It should be just ahead, Beau said, pointing to a ridge lined with pine trees. There's a lightning-struck oak with a hollow trunk. That's where I hid the saddlebags. As they approached the ridge, Beau motioned for Violet to wait while he scouted ahead on foot. The snow made silent movement impossible, but it would also reveal any other tracks. He scanned the white expanse carefully before signaling her to follow. The oak stood as he remembered, its split trunk creating a perfect hiding place. Beau reached deep into the hollow, relief washing through him as his fingers touched leather. He withdrew 2 heavy saddlebags, checking quickly to confirm their contents. Neat stacks of bills, undisturbed. We did it, he said, securing the bags to Sunny's saddle. Now we just need to. A distant sound stopped him mid-sentence, the muffled clopping of horses moving through snow. Violet's eyes widened. Someone's coming. Beau moved quickly, leading both horses behind a thick stand of pines. Stay here. Don't move unless I signal you. He crept forward, staying low and using the trees for cover. From his vantage point near the ridge's edge, he could see 3 riders approaching from the east, following his and Violet's tracks in the snow. Even at this distance, he recognized them. The same men who had ambushed him, one with his arm in a crude sling. They were moving cautiously, rifles at the ready, clearly tracking the fresh prints leading right to this spot. Beau slipped back to where Violet waited. It's them. They must have been searching nearby and found our trail. Fear flashed across her face, quickly replaced by determination. What do we do? Beau considered their options. We can't outrun them in this snow. We need to circle back, find cover, let them pass. And if they follow our tracks all the way back to the cabin? A valid concern. Beau thought quickly. There's a creek about a mile north of here. If we can reach it, travel in the water for a while, then exit in a different direction. It was a desperate plan, but their only chance. They mounted quickly and set off, moving as fast as the deep snow allowed, staying within the tree line to avoid being spotted from below. For 20 tense minutes, they pushed through the forest, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind them. Just as Beau began to hope they might escape cleanly, a shout echoed through the trees. There! I see movement. A rifle crack followed, the bullet splintering bark from a tree just feet from Violet's head. Her horse reared in panic, nearly unseating her. Ride! Beau yelled. drawing his revolver and firing 2 shots to cover their retreat. Head for the creek. They plunged through the snow, branches whipping their faces as they urged their horses to greater speed. More shots rang out behind them, but the dense forest and fading light made accuracy impossible. The creek appeared ahead, a narrow ribbon cutting through the white landscape. "Follow me," Beau called, guiding Sunny into the shallow, icy water. Violet followed, her face pale but composed. They splashed downstream for nearly a quarter-mile before Beau spotted a rocky outcropping where they could exit without leaving obvious tracks. Night was falling rapidly, the forest growing darker by the minute. "We'll head west," he whispered as they paused to listen for pursuit. "There's a line shack I remember passing about 3 miles from here. We can shelter there tonight." Violet nodded, her breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. "They won't give up easily." "No," Beau agreed grimly. "Not with $15,000 at stake." They rode in silence, the only sounds the crunch of snow beneath hooves and their own measured breathing. The line shack, when they finally reached it, was little more than a crude shelter used by cowboys during cattle drives, a single room with a small stove, a rough bunk, and little else. But it was out of the wind and hidden in a stand of thick pines. While Violet tended to the horses, Beau cleared snow from the doorway and checked inside. No one had used the place in months, but it was intact and defensible. He quickly got a small fire going in the stove, careful to keep it minimal so the smoke wouldn't be visible in the night sky. When Violet joined him, her cheeks were flushed from the cold, her hair dusted with snowflakes. In the dim light from the stove, she looked ethereal, almost otherworldly. "The horses are settled," she reported. "Hidden as best I could manage." Beau nodded. "We should be safe here for the night. They won't risk tracking us in darkness." "But tomorrow?" "Tomorrow we need to reach the railroad agent in town." Beau unpacked the saddlebags, checking again that the money was secure. "It's our only chance to end this." Violet moved closer to the stove, warming her hands. "That means riding right into the place those men are using as a base." "Yes, but with the railroad's authority behind us, we'll have protection." Beau hesitated, then added, "You don't have to come with me to town. I could take you back to your cabin first." She shook her head firmly. "No, we stay together." Her eyes met his in the firelight. "I didn't come this far to turn back now." The simple courage in her words humbled him. This woman, who had already lost so much, was willing to risk everything to help him complete his mission. In that moment, Beau knew with absolute certainty that his earlier impulsive proposal had been right. He wanted a future with Violet Winters, whatever challenges that might bring. "Try to get some sleep," he said gently. "I'll take first watch." The tiny cabin had only the single bunk, but Violet insisted on sharing the watch duties. She curled up in her coat near the stove while Beau positioned himself by the window, rifle across his lap, watching the moonlight create silver patterns on the snow outside. 2 hours later, as he was about to wake her for her shift, a soft sound caught his attention, a horse's snort, quickly hushed. Beau froze, straining to hear. There it was again, the unmistakable sound of movement outside. He crossed silently to where Violet slept and touched her shoulder. She woke instantly, alert, reading the warning in his eyes. Without a word, she gathered her gear while Beau extinguished the stove. A voice outside confirmed his fears. "Smoke's fresh. They're in there." "Could be anybody," another voice replied. "Trapper, maybe. With a palomino and a bay? Don't be stupid. It's our man, and he's got company." Beau motioned Violet toward the cabin's rear wall, where rough boards had warped enough to create a small gap. Outside, he could now make out 3 shapes in the darkness, approaching cautiously from different angles. "We have to split up," he whispered urgently. "I'll draw them off. You take Sunny and the money, head for town." Violet's eyes widened in alarm. "No, that's suicide. Trust me." Beau pressed the saddlebags into her hands. "I know these woods. I can lose them and circle back." "Beau, please." He touched her face gently. "This is our best chance." Before she could protest further, he leaned forward and kissed her. A brief, fierce connection that contained everything he couldn't say aloud. Then he moved to the door, preparing to create the diversion that might save her life. "When you hear shooting, go out the back and head southwest," he instructed. "The main road to town is about 4 miles in that direction." Violet gripped his arm. "Don't you dare die on me, Beau Vickers." A smile touched his lips. "Yes, ma'am." With that, He flung open the door and fired 2 quick shots into the air, then dashed for his horse. As expected, all 3 men immediately gave chase, focusing on the fleeing rider rather than checking the cabin. Behind him, gunfire erupted, bullets whizzing past as he zigzagged through the trees. Beau rode hard, leading his pursuers deeper into the forest, away from Violet's escape route. His horse labored through the snow, but the men behind him faced the same challenge. For nearly an hour, he maintained the chase, doubling back occasionally to ensure they were still following him rather than returning to the cabin. Finally, confident that Violet had enough time to get safely away, Beau decided to make his stand. He chose his ground carefully, a small ravine where he could take cover while still having a clear view of the approaching riders. The wait wasn't long. 3 shadows materialized through the trees, moving more cautiously now that they'd lost sight of their quarry. Beau took aim at the lead rider, the one whose arm he'd wounded in their first encounter. His first shot struck true, sending the man tumbling from his saddle with a cry of pain. The other 2 immediately scattered, diving for cover and returning fire. Bullets thudded into the snowbank around Beau's position as he methodically picked his targets, forcing them to stay pinned down. "Give it up, Vickers," one of them shouted. "Tell us where the money is, and we might let you live." Beau didn't bother responding. Instead, he used their distraction to change positions, moving silently through the underbrush until he had a clear shot at the man on the left. His bullet found its mark, and another howl of pain split the night. Now it was 1 against 1. Beau could hear the last man breathing heavily, fear evident in his rapid movements as he tried to locate his unseen attacker. "Your friends are down," Beau called. "Throw out your gun, and you can ride away from this." Silence answered him. Then the sudden crackle of branches as the man made a desperate break for his horse. Beau fired, missing the running figure but striking the horse instead. The animal reared and bolted, leaving the outlaw stranded. More shots were exchanged as they played a deadly game of hide and seek through the moonlit forest. Beau was circling to get a better position when his foot caught on a hidden root, sending him sprawling into the snow. His rifle slipped from his grasp, sliding down a small incline. Before he could recover, the outlaw was upon him, tackling him hard. They rolled through the snow, trading punches, neither able to reach their sidearms. The man was heavier, stronger, but Beau was fighting for more than just his life. With a surge of desperate energy, Beau managed to break free and scramble to his feet. The outlaw charged again, but this time Beau was ready. He sidestepped at the last moment, sending his attacker crashing into a tree trunk. The man slumped to the ground, momentarily stunned. Beau didn't hesitate. He retrieved his revolver and trained it on the groaning figure. "It's over," he said flatly. "The money's gone. You'll never find it now." The outlaw spat blood into the snow. "You're dead anyway. Might as well take me with you." "Not today." Beau used his belt to secure the man's hands behind his back. "You're going to face a judge for what you've done." With his prisoner secured, Beau quickly checked the other 2 men. One was dead, a bullet through his chest. The other, the leader, was alive but badly wounded, the fresh injury compounding his earlier arm wound. Rounding up the scattered horses was the work of another hour. But finally, Beau had both prisoners mounted, tied securely to their saddles. Dawn was breaking as he began the long trek toward town, leading the small procession through the snow-covered forest. His thoughts, however, were not on his captives, but on Violet. Had she made it safely to town? Found the railroad agent? Or had some other danger intercepted her along the way? The sun was high overhead when the first buildings of the settlement came into view, a small mining town that had grown around the railroad's expansion. Beau approached cautiously, alert for any sign of trouble, but the streets appeared peaceful under their blanket of snow. As they reached the main street, attention quickly focused on the unusual sight, a trail-worn cowboy leading 2 bound and bloodied men on horseback. The local sheriff emerged from his office, hand on his revolver. "What's this about?" he demanded. Before Beau could answer, a commotion erupted from the direction of the hotel. A man in a neat Eastern suit came hurrying toward them, followed by— Beau's heart leapt. Violet, looking tired but unharmed. "Sheriff, this is the man I told you about," the suited man announced. "Beau Vickers, the railroad courier. And I see he's brought our thieves with him." Relief washed through Beau as he dismounted, barely taking his eyes off Violet. "These 2 are part of the gang that's been hitting payroll shipments." There's a third man dead in the woods about 7 miles northeast of here. The sheriff nodded, gesturing to his deputies to take charge of the prisoners. Miss Winters arrived early this morning with quite a tale. And the missing payroll. He gave Beau an appraising look. The railroad agent here has been very interested in hearing the full story. And I'd be happy to provide it, Beau replied. But first, he crossed to where Violet stood, her violet eyes never leaving his face. Without hesitation, he pulled her into his arms, holding her as if he might never let go. You made it, she whispered against his chest. I promised I wouldn't die on you, he reminded her, smiling despite his exhaustion. And I intend to keep that promise for a very long time. The railroad agent cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps we could continue this discussion at the hotel? I'm sure Mr. Vickers and Miss Winters could use some rest and a hot meal. The following hours passed in a blur of statements, telegrams, and expressions of gratitude from the railroad. The money was officially returned, the surviving outlaws locked securely in the town jail, and Beau and Violet provided with comfortable rooms at the hotel, separate rooms, as propriety demanded, though neither particularly cared about such niceties after all they'd been through. That evening, as they sat in the hotel's small dining room, the railroad agent presented Beau with an envelope. The company's reward for the return of their property, he explained. $500 and a standing offer of employment, should you want it. Beau accepted the envelope with thanks, but his mind was already elsewhere. Across the table, Violet watched him with a mixture of affection and uncertainty. What will you do now? She asked when they were finally alone. Beau reached across the table to take her hand. That depends on you. On me. I meant what I said back at your cabin, Violet. About starting fresh together. He held her gaze steadily. These past weeks have shown me what I've been missing all these years on the trail. Not just a home, but someone to share it with. Violet's fingers tightened around his. I'm still afraid, Beau. Afraid of losing again. I know. He brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. But I'm more afraid of never having. Of missing the chance to build something real with you. Tears glistened in her eyes, but she was smiling. I never expected to feel this way again. To want a future with someone. Is that a yes? He asked, hope rising in his chest. It's a yes, she confirmed. But I have conditions. Beau raised an eyebrow, amused. Name them. First, we find a place with good pasture. Sunny deserves the best after all she's been through. Agreed. Second, wherever we settle needs to be within riding distance of a town. I've had enough isolation to last a lifetime. Beau nodded. Very reasonable. And third, Violet's expression grew more serious. We take things slowly, get to know each other properly, build our life together one day at a time. Those are terms I can happily accept, Beau said, his heart fuller than he could remember it being in years. Anything else? Violet stood, tugging him to his feet. Yes, kiss me again, properly this time, without outlaws interrupting. Beau was only too happy to comply, drawing her into his arms in the middle of the now empty dining room, uncaring of who might see. This woman who had tended his wounded horse had somehow also healed his lonely heart, giving him a future he'd never dared imagine. Spring came early to the valley they eventually chose for their home, a verdant stretch of land nestled between rolling hills and a clear-running creek. The cabin was small but sturdy, with a view of distant mountains and room to expand. Most importantly, it had a barn big enough for several horses, including Sunny, who now grazed contentedly in the meadow alongside Violet's bay. They were married in the nearby town on a bright April morning, with Jacob the trapper and his wife as witnesses. The railroad agent, true to his word, had arranged for Beau to receive a permanent bonus for his service, enough to buy their land outright and stock it with a small herd to start their breeding operation. As summer approached, Beau often found himself pausing in his work just to watch Violet move about their property, tending the garden, caring for a new foal, bringing him lemonade on hot afternoons. Her smile came more readily now, her laughter more frequent. The shadows in her eyes hadn't disappeared entirely, nor had his own, but they no longer defined either of them. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Violet leaned her head against his shoulder. Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out? She asked. If Sunny hadn't been injured that day, if you'd never found my cabin. Beau slipped an arm around her waist, pulling her closer. I prefer to think that some things are meant to be. That no matter what path I took, I would have found my way to you eventually. Violet smiled at this, turning to meet his gaze. The wounded cowboy and the woman hiding from life. Who would have thought we'd end up here? I knew, Beau said with conviction. From the moment you stepped forward to help a stranger and his injured horse instead of turning us away. She kissed him then, a kiss filled with promise and possibility, with the certainty of a future unfolding before them. Not perfect, perhaps, but theirs to shape together, one day at a time. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across their land, Beau Vickers silently thanked whatever twist of fate had led him, wounded and desperate, to the doorstep of the remarkable woman who had healed not only his horse, but his heart as well.